Welcome to Gaga's Fiction. In this series, we'll explore the epic what-if scenario where Naruto gets banished and awakens his mysterious Kekkei Genkai. Part 1, coming up. Don't forget to hit that notification bell to catch every exciting episode. Let's get started. Elena Callan knows she's in a bad situation when she opens her eyes and realizes she isn't dead. Memories of the terrible car accident she was involved in make her whimper in pain as her body aches. It wasn't her fault. She was on public transportation for her part-time job when a car collided with the bus she was on, causing a series of crashes with other vehicles. She felt her body sore, and before she knew it, everything turned black. It wasn't her first car accident, but it was the most serious. She knows she must have suffered severe injuries. Even death could have been a possibility. But the white surroundings and the scent of medicines indicated she was in a hospital. She struggled to sit up in bed, feeling her entire body ache with the slightest movement. With one hand, she touched her bruised face, which made her feel nauseous. Her stomach seemed to twist with both hunger and pain, but she held back because she hated the feeling of nausea. She threw the sheets aside to inspect her wounds. Surprisingly, despite the unflattering hospital gown, there weren't as many bandages on her legs as she had feared. It was painful but not as bad as it could have been. Something doesn't seem to make sense. She stretched her body a little, feeling pain in various joints, before groaning as she tried to get out of bed. At least, she could still walk, she thought as she removed the cables that connected her to unfamiliar machines she didn't remember seeing. The doctors might scold her, but she was never good with hospitals. She vaguely wondered about her family's whereabouts, especially her parents. They should be with her. She pondered this as she walked toward the door to call a nurse. Her family has always been there when something goes wrong. She stopped when she passed a window. Her reflection made her pause in confusion before turning to look closely. The window showed her face, which looked very similar to what she had always seen in the mirror. However, there were two factors that hadn't been there before. Her hair was much longer, though it was still dark brown, down to her mid-back, and her eyes seemed different, with shades of blue instead of the brown she had been accustomed to her whole life. Moreover, she appeared much younger than she remembered. She touched her face in confusion, and her reflection quickly mimicked her movements. What's going on? She worried before pinching her cheek, but when she felt the pain, she ruled out the idea of a dream. She must look ridiculous because the door opened, and a nurse appeared, looking alarmed to see her standing, then quickly guided her back to the bed. She let it happen in confusion. Elena didn't understand what was happening, and everything seemed more and more unreal. Why did she look so young? Elena is 25 years old, with a relatively relaxed life in many respects. She completed her university studies 2 years ago but currently only has part-time jobs while seeking a more stable one. She has loving parents, several older sisters, nephews, and a tranquility and stability she's accustomed to. Even though people often assume she's younger due to her well-maintained skin and somewhat youthful appearance, being of small stature, slender, and not particularly well endowed in the chest, she had never looked this young since she was a teenager. She doesn't understand what has happened. She looks at the nurse, who seems to have asked her something, but she doesn't know if she wants to answer or can answer anything. Takatori-san, the nurse calls again. Elena turns her head in confusion. Was she talking to her? Takatori-san shouldn't get up. She's been in the middle of an accident and needs to rest, the nurse mutters, pushing her back onto the bed. The word accident calms her. It's like something anchoring her to reality. She places a hand on her face, and if she weren't so confused, she could swear it radiated a greenish light that makes her yawn. With a strange drowsiness throughout her body, she lets unconsciousness fill her. Maybe her eyes looked different due to the sunlight, maybe she didn't see clearly, and her hair was definitely just past her shoulders. Yes, it was just a strange random occurrence. When she wakes up again, everything will be as it was before. This is confusing because of the medications. Her parents and family will probably be there when she wakes up again. Nothing returns to normal when she wakes up. She's horrified to find that her hair is still as long as she feared. She never had her hair this long, she always kept it short for practicality. She thinks she must have been unconscious for too long for it to grow this way. Contrary to looking older after being in a coma, she appears to have rejuvenated. She has many questions in her mind, so when the doctor arrives, she prefers to stay silent to hear what has happened. When he asks if she remembers the accident, she shakes her head in confusion. Why do they keep calling her Takatori-san? That's how they address Japanese people, but she's American, thank you very much. She listens as the doctor introduces himself, a woman with short, matte blue hair. She seems calm while reviewing some papers that appear to be hers. She's confused to notice that the writing is strange, it doesn't look like the alphabet she's accustomed to. She feels a strange sensation on her back. Where is she exactly? But as she has always been reserved, even in her concerns, she prefers to wear a tense smile while waiting for someone to explain what's happening. There was a gas leak in the residential area, specifically in your apartment complex, and when it exploded, there were several injuries. You came in with some first-degree burns and broken bones, but most have been treated successfully. You have a serious head injury, but upon examination, it doesn't seem to be causing any issues, and we'll be monitoring you, the doctor explains before setting the papers aside and approaching her head. Gas leak? What happened to the car accident? She also wants to ask about her family, if they know she's awake, or if they'll come soon to take her home. She thinks worriedly as the nurse, with a hand on her head, seems to touch a bump that makes her flinch. That hurt. You'll need to be under observation for a few more days, but soon you can return to work as if nothing had happened, the doctor says with a faint smile. She wants to ask questions but feels somewhat confused. She nods timidly as the doctor leaves. In the middle of the hospital bed, she hugs her knees, feeling bewildered. Fortunately, she's always been someone who enjoys sleeping, so when she falls asleep a few minutes later, she doesn't feel bad at all. When she wakes up, no one is there. Her family isn't there again. The emptiness in her heart feels heavy. 2 days after waking up, she has a visitor, a boy she's never seen before with short black hair, large brown eyes, and who appears to be around 17 years old. Unlike the doctors and nurses, he's wearing clothes that are hard to describe, dark pants, and a green t-shirt. The strange part is his shoes, they look like sandals, almost like boots that leave his toes exposed. Not much sense of fashion. Hikari-chan, I'm glad to see you're feeling better, the boy says, almost jumping onto her. She furrows her brow, puzzled. Everyone seems to be calling her by a different name, and even though her first instinct is to deny being that person, she doesn't want to. Of course, it's her initial reaction, but she's not so foolish to say something everyone seems sure about in the middle of a hospital. The last time she denied being injured in one, when she clearly had blood on her head, she ended up hospitalized for a week, which fueled her hatred of hospitals. She smiles slightly when the boy takes a seat beside her but doesn't hug her. Fortunately, she's not comfortable with physical contact from strangers. Yes, she mutters quietly, wanting him to leave. But when she sees the nurse depart, she assumes he's her best source of information. He looks at her intensely, and he has a dimple on one of his cheeks. He seems like a very trustworthy guy. A bit of an idiot, she guesses in her mind. It's not common to approach such bright people who aren't family or long-time acquaintances. But she supposes she can make an attempt to figure out what's happening here. We were worried when everything happened, but don't worry, Yamada-san understands you can't work in this condition. You've also lost your apartment. I'll help you find a new one as soon as you get out of here. You can stay with Ruri-chan and me, he says quickly with a smile. She doesn't know who Ruri is. Ruri-chan was so worried, but you know she has a lot of work at the academy lately. She promises to come visit you tomorrow. She nods vaguely before her hand goes to her head. For a moment, an image flashes in her mind. The image of a girl with blonde hair and large brown eyes appears with a blink, wearing somewhat strange clothes she doesn't recognize. She's surprised because it's the image of someone she's never seen in her life. What's going on? Are you okay, Hikari-chan? The boy next to her asks, concerned. She hisses a bit but nods before moving her hand away. She's skilled at pretending that something doesn't hurt. Her mother has always been quite resilient when it comes to pain, so having her as a role model, she learned to endure some levels of pain. Her family usually gets worried when she cries from pain because it's not common for her. It means the pain must be unbearable. Now her head hurts, but she can tolerate it. Yes, just a slight ache, nothing to worry about, she quickly mutters defensively. The boy seems to furrow his brow before nodding uncertainly. The doc said you might have headaches for a few days. Even though he used medical ninjutsu, you had a good hit on the head, the boy explains, worried. She stops and turns her head, confused by what the boy said. Medical ninjutsu? She asks, not understanding why the term sounds so familiar. Maybe they've developed a medical treatment she's not aware of. She usually isn't well informed about medical advancements. The young man seems even more concerned. Are you sure you're okay? He asks her another question she doesn't answer this time. She feels a strange chill run down her spine because the term sounds too familiar to her. But the idea that's formed in her head seems even ridiculous. Elena is actually a fan of foreign series, especially Japanese ones, which stand out in the world of anime and manga. Since she was less than 5 years old, she's been watching anime with her older sisters. Even when they stopped, she continued watching Japanese series. For her, the Naruto series is not unfamiliar, she knows it and has seen it a few times, even read its manga once. Elena genuinely enjoys writing, and it's her secret passion that she keeps well hidden. So, in addition to devouring books all her life, she has delved into the dark world of fanfiction. She knows much more about the series from the fanfics others write than from the series itself. She has even written about the series a few times. So, the idea of medical ninjutsu reminds her too much of the series. Is this some kind of joke? But from whom? She has kept her passionate fanfiction life a well-guarded secret from the people she knows. No one should know that she enjoys writing fanfiction, even though some are aware of her love for anime. But Naruto is not her favorite series by a long shot, so if someone wanted to play a prank, they should have chosen a different series. This must be a prank. If it's not, she doesn't want to think about it, her logical side won't let her dwell on the situation. What's the name of the city we're in? She asks, not caring how silly it sounds. The boy's look makes her realize it's a bad question due to his level of concern. Hikari-chan. We're in Konoha, our home, the boy answers with worry. Elena laughs without humor. If this is a joke, it's in very bad taste. The guy who spoke with her is named Aki something. She doesn't bother to remember his last name because she has other problems. Dr. Iwan quickly enters when Aki reports that something is wrong with her head. She doesn't know what to say and what not to say, but in an act of foolishness or intelligence, she comments on the few things she remembers from the Naruto anime, which earns her the perception of not being a lunatic. Although she thinks her answers would be wrong, it seems to be the right thing to say. She talks about the Hokage, ninja life, the 5 nations, and vaguely recalls some things from her life watching anime. But when asked about herself, she admits she doesn't remember much. Dissociative amnesia. Dr. Iwan says, but Elena fears it's more than that. Since she has practically forgotten the life that doesn't belong to her, her name in this body is Takatori Hikari, which is ironic because, even though she looks physically the same as her previous life, she doesn't remember anything about this body. Aki tries to explain this life to her so she can understand some things. Apparently, she had a family, as large as in her previous life, who died in an event called October 10th, 7 years ago. Although no one says it out loud, if it's the world of Naruto, which she still can't fully accept, she can get an idea of what happened. Ruri and Aki are twin siblings who were also orphaned on that day, so they met in an orphanage and have been friends since. Ruri is a chunin who is studying to become an academy teacher, while Aki, who is also a chunin, works in the Konoha Archives library with her. To her surprise, she is also supposed to be a ninja, but she hasn't been on missions for a long time, indicating that she was only in the academy to survive. They say it doesn't seem like she excelled at anything. Although being a chunin should mean something, as she was on the team with Ruri and Aki. But it doesn't. While Aki talks about her life, she feels like they're reading the wrong person's file because she doesn't remember anything. When she timidly mentioned that she didn't recognize the characters on the paper in front of her, the doctor seemed more curious about her case. She doesn't know how to explain that this life isn't hers, that her memories have nothing to do with whatever makes up this world. Maybe she's in a coma in her original world, and her mind has created this entire world as an escape from reality. We'll let her rest, I'll send a report to your boss, and we'll work on your case with a Yamanaka, but for now, we'll have to let her rest, Iwan explains when she sees Aki's bewildered face during the explanations. He seems clearly upset but nods, promising to return tomorrow. Alone in her room, she looks at the ceiling, feeling a strange emptiness inside. If, in some strange and fantastical way, all of this is real, it means she has not only lost her family from her previous life but also the family of this world. She curls up on the bed while hugging a pillow. For some reason, she feels the loneliness hitting hard, and this body seems to long for something it can't remember. She's not someone who cries easily, but this body seems to be. Tears bathe her face. She feels lost. Ruri is a pretty girl, Elena thinks when she meets her. Her face looks like that of a doll, and her blonde hair looks like a model's. Ruri seems to be aware of her situation as she introduces herself kindly when they meet, making the situation less awkward. Kato Ruri is the girl's name, who seems as young as Elena is now. She's confused by being called Hikari but never reveals that she has another life inside or memories of another world. She still refuses to believe that this is real, everything seems more like a product of her imagination, even though, not physically, Ruri looks like her best friend from her other life. This text is about how much Elena likes children, just like her best friend did in another world, and her determination to help, no matter what. Aki and Ruri seem to agree that she should live with them in their home, as they believe she should be surrounded by a family-like environment. She accepts, especially because she has no place to return to. A member of the Yamanaka clan performed a mind trick that left her confused when he couldn't enter her mind. According to what the doctor mentioned, it seemed like there was a seal in her mind, something she imposed on herself to block her memories. So exposure therapy might be her only way to recover her previous life. Not very sure if that could be possible, she simply nodded with boredom when they sealed the exit, with the duty to return every Friday for a checkup. It's when she leaves the hospital that she maybe starts to accept, either she's in a deep dream or in another world, specifically the world of Naruto. Not only are the buildings completely different from what she had ever observed, but the mountain with 4 faces carved on it was enough to make her feel horrified while Ruri guided her through the village, holding her hand. She couldn't do anything but look around incredulously at the people in strange clothes, some with uncommon hair colors, and children running on rooftops. She wanted to vomit. Aki had to carry her on his back for the rest of the journey. When they passed by what she identified as ninjas with dogs by their side, the Inuzuka clan, if she's not mistaken, and one of the dogs spoke, she ended up fainting on her friend's back while they shouted her name. Yes, quite a lot for exposure therapy. Elena starts to accept the name Hikari with some regret a month after her return. She liked the name Elena because her mother had the same name in the other world where she had her previous life. But with a month in this body, she's begun to develop different theories as time passes, especially because she has started to have memories of this body. They aren't many, just small glimpses of people who are now dead, like little moments with Ruri and Aki. The most significant advantage is that it seems she has enough memories to understand the language in this world, especially their texts, as well as some knowledge of chakra. It's strange for Elena/Hikari to feel the flow of energy in her body in this way. It's also strange that her mind has memories of what this body experienced, even though she clearly isn't the soul that usually inhabited it. Ruri and Aki seem to view the small returning memories favorably, as does the doctor who allows her to return to work. It's not a very challenging job. It mainly involves archiving documents and delivering them to the ninjas who come to request them. Before, her job consisted of transcribing or making copies of documents, but Mr. Yamada, the librarian, is letting her go little by little. She doesn't leave Ruri and Aki's house much, even though she wants to have her own apartment as in her previous life. Since she has little knowledge of this world, she lets both her friends from this life take up her presence. After a few months, she will look for an apartment and start a new life. If this isn't a product of her coma-induced imagination, she supposes she needs to be self-reliant. That's until she thinks about what she'll do. If this is the world of Naruto, she has very important information in her mind not to do anything. She has knowledge of the future and the past of this story. Given that there are only 4 faces on the Hokage mountain, she assumes she's between the time of Naruto's birth and the interlude when Tsunade takes over the village. But she doesn't want to think about that right now. She wants to settle into her current possible life before attempting to fix others. She had read in her previous life as Elena about characters dying and reincarnating in other worlds, although she had always thought they were just science fiction tales. Now that she's in the middle of one, it seems much more complicated than she had read. Knowledge could be her best weapon as well as her greatest weakness. She didn't want to think about what someone would do if they could know what's inside her mind, undoubtedly a blessing that the Yamanaka clan couldn't access. She also had a theory about multiple universes. It was the only explanation for why in this body, she looked exactly like in her previous life. Looking at her reflection in the mirror during this month, she could see the 16-year-old Elena she once was, with the difference that she had long hair, her eyes had some blue glints, and her body seemed a bit more toned. Elena used to exercise in her previous life, but Hikari had the body of a ninja, maybe not the strongest ninja, but someone who could fight. Something. Elena had practiced some martial arts, at least to attach to this knowledge. Hikari's body retained muscle memory. She had tested it when Aki approached her from behind, almost sending him flying. However, she had no idea how to perform any ninjutsu. Her element seemed to have been water, but she didn't remember how to use it or how to walk on walls. She felt pathetic and knew she couldn't defend herself if someone were to attack her. So, she decided to keep her knowledge hidden in her brain, trying to blend in until she had some idea of what to do. If someone like Danzo or the Akatsuki ever set their sights on her, she was sure she'd die in this second life. She didn't even want to think about Orochimaru, that guy always gave her the creeps. But coming back to the point that she resembled her previous life too much, even with her adorable 5'3" stature, she was quite short in this world. She had the theory of multiple universes. She had played with that idea in her stories before, different universes that had something in common. Perhaps in her previous life as Elena, she shared a soul with Hikari. So, when they both had an accident, somehow their souls swapped. As she recalled, Hikari's body had been in a coma for a week before she entered it. Possibly, when Hikari died, Elena took her place. Could Hikari be in Elena's body? She wasn't sure if that possibility existed, if both of them were swapping bodies, or if she even survived her previous accident in her other life. She doubted it, especially when some memories from her previous life started to cloud her mind. She hadn't thought about it when she woke up, but now she remembered being trapped in the middle of the bus, her lower body crushed, hearing the ambulance and others shouting. She remembered the pain and a paramedic holding her hand as she cried, terrified because there was no hope of survival. Yes, she died in her previous world, and now she was in this body and this world. Elena was now Hikari. She whimpered, tugging at her hair. She had been in front of a mirror for at least half an hour, but she didn't understand much more about what to do now. Her life had been good before. She wasn't a millionaire, but she had a family, pets, friends, and their love. Maybe she was a spinster at the time she died, but she had kissed some guys. Her forehead turned blue, she was a virgin in both worlds. She was sure one of Elena's friends would have scolded her for dying a virgin, but it wasn't the time to think about that now. She splashed her face with water, put on dark pants and a sleeveless green shirt, and those ridiculous ninja sandals. She had plenty of mental complaints about them. They weren't practical, you could lose a finger, and they got your feet dirty. Aki was waiting for her at the entrance to their house to go to work together. Ruri had left half an hour ago. She felt her friend's worried gaze on her back, which she ignored as she left the apartment. She had been sleeping in the same room as Ruri. They lived near the archive library, so her route hadn't changed much in the last month. Konoha was huge, much more than she had recognized in the anime she had watched in her previous life. While she had some memories of this body, she would be totally lost if she wandered alone in this place. It was an offense. Elena had been very good at knowing her city previously and traveling unsupervised. But now, Aki was like her personal babysitter. She huffed, hands in her pockets, watching the road irritably. Even with Aki and Ruri, she felt a strange sense of loss and loneliness when she saw families on the way. Elena had always been someone quite homely, not going out much except with close friends. She always spent time with her family and played board games on Friday nights since she was a child. Today, we should buy some dengo for the evening, Aki said with a smile beside her. She nodded vaguely. She wasn't a big fan of this food. She had never been a fan of Asian cuisine, except for sushi, which was heaven. She missed the taste of her food in her previous life. Fortunately, this body was accustomed to eating this type of food. It seemed happy at the idea of trying some dengo. It was as if her brain and body were separate entities, as if it were challenging to coexist in this world, but she intended to do it, intended to take full control of her body. Looking through a window display, she didn't notice the stone in her path and fell face first, making Aki alert and some passers-by laugh. Despite the obvious humiliation, she didn't feel embarrassed as she stood up and dusted herself off. Elena had been a clumsy person who used to fall all the time, and it seemed she shared that with Hikari. Even though she looked like a 16-year-old teenager, she had a 25-year-old mind, and falling didn't seem as embarrassing as it might be. Maybe age had nothing to do with it, and she simply wouldn't be embarrassed about something like that in any world. Aki looked worried, but she dismissed it with a wave of her hand, and they continued their way. "I handle mission reports 3426, says a voice in front of Elena/Hikari, making her jump a bit. It's been 2 months since she arrived in this world. The possibility of this being a product of her coma-induced imagination seems distant now. It's becoming more likely that this world is real, and she somehow ended up here. Yamada-san, her supervisor, has once again left her in charge of the reception to deliver reports to the ninja. This world lacks electronic devices, as she recalls, making it quite boring. She used to spend hours playing video games and browsing websites, but this world has neither. So, she has a lot of free time to learn how this library and most important locations work." Ruri and Aki congratulate her, as does Yamada-san, for demonstrating her quick memory and learning abilities. She's not sure if it's from her previous life or her current one, but she has always been good at memorizing things. The reports are usually delivered to Jounin, most of whom seem to vaguely recognize her and express sympathy for her memory loss, to which she shrugs. Many ninjas don't often appear in the world of Naruto, so she doesn't recognize half of them. Today, an Anbu has arrived, but due to his stature, he doesn't seem much older than she is. In fact, he appears very young. She looks at him closely before shrugging. This world is twisted, making kids grow up too fast. She jumps from her seat to go to the back, where she remembers the reports are stored. The Anbu follows her calmly. She climbs a staircase near the end, and after some searching through the files, she finds the one the young Anbu requested. Carefully, she descends the stairs, but on the last step, she stumbles and falls flat on the ground. The Anbu seems to rush over to her, but she quickly gets up, ignoring the trickle of blood from her nose. "Don't worry, this is common, a hereditary clumsiness or something," she admits, standing on her own feet and relieved that the file remains intact. Yamada-san is very kind to her, but his face changes when someone does something to his precious files. From her perspective, even with the mask, she can sense some disbelief and concern from the Anbu, which makes her smile. They are humans after all, although they are also assassins. In this body, she has no memories of killing anyone. When she asks Aki about it, he admits they never killed anyone. Becoming Chunin was just pure luck for the three of them in those exams. As they leave the archive room, she can see another Anbu waiting for them. Unlike the black-haired boy, this one has messy gray hair and seems to be her age. She blinks in thought before the answer comes to her. Kakashi Hatake and Uchiha Itachi were in the Anbu. She can't be 100% sure it's them, but she's about 70% certain. So, this isn't the time when Naruto is a Genin. She hasn't seen many people, especially because Aki keeps her well protected from the outside world. But now, she thinks, maybe Naruto is a child. If this is Itachi and he's in the village, the massacre hasn't happened. She twists her lips a bit at the thought of the massacre about to occur. She'd like to do something, but going against Danzo would put a target on her back, and she doubts anyone would believe her. It all sounds too crazy in her mind, and she's the one experiencing it. "They're waiting for you at headquarters," Kakashi, the one with the silver hair, speaks with a voice devoid of emotions, sending shivers down her spine. She had always seen the silver-haired ninja as a sensei who, though lazy, for good reasons, cared deeply for his students. After all, they were his last bonds to form and the ones he fought alongside against a semi-goddess at the end of the world. She vaguely wonders how the man would feel if she revealed Obito's location. He'd probably kill her for mentioning his name. Even though Itachi wears a mask like Kakashi, she shrinks under the weight of his gaze. "I need you to sign some Anbu documents, and then you'll be free," Kakashi says, looking at the younger one in the room, who still appears worried as he signs the papers. She absent-mindedly wipes the blood from her nose and hands the file to the young Anbu with calm. She's not a huge fan of Itachi, like many other social media fans, but his story has always seemed very sad. When Kakashi walks out of the room, she notices Itachi giving her a final glance, to which she responds with a smile and a slight wave as a farewell. He bows before disappearing in front of her. Being a ninja looks so cool, but she's the only person on Earth who ends up in this world without remembering how to be a ninja. She sighs before returning to the file she needs to rewrite for Yamada-san. Aki shows up a few minutes later with 2 boxes of food, and her stomach growls. They go to eat what Ruri prepared. It's like having a goddess's touch in the kitchen. After 2 months and 2 weeks, Aki finally gave her the green light to explore the village on her own. She had jumped with excitement upon hearing that she would have freedom and space for herself. While her friend seemed hesitant, Ruri applauded with excitement. Hikari had been just as independent as Elena, so it was only a matter of time before she hit the streets with freedom, without someone breathing down her neck for every little thing. Although her memories appeared to be frozen and unrecoverable, she began to refer to herself as Hikari in her mind. She had nothing against Elena, that was her dominant identity now, as Hikari had passed away, leaving only a few memories in her body. But thinking of herself as Elena was painful because it was a reminder of all that she had lost. In the solitude of the night, she would recall her family, her sisters, her nephews, and her friends. It was so painful, and she knew she couldn't easily let go, nor did she want to, but she also couldn't live in self-pity forever. She thought that the first step to move forward was to accept that she was now Hikari. Her body had left her with a few things: basic knowledge of this place, like the language she recognized as Japanese, images of people who were part of Hikari's life, although most memories with them were missing, and a slight knowledge of being a ninja. She still couldn't walk on water or climb trees, but at least she had some self-defense skills. In all other respects, she was Elena, with knowledge from her past life and her previous world's interests. It was complicated because, in a way, they were the same entity, but to put it simply, it was Elena who was now at the helm of Hikari. So, when they allowed her to go out alone, with some money in her pocket, she didn't waste any time saying goodbye as she rushed out of the house. The idea of looking for an apartment crossed her mind, but she decided to wait for 4 months in this body before seeking her independence. She preferred to walk through the commercial area to buy something for Ruri and Aki. While they were her best friends in this world, they had done a lot for her, and she wanted to show her appreciation. She ended up in a bookstore, looking for some books to read in her free time. Seeing the lack of interesting novels, she thought that maybe she could recreate some from her previous life. It wouldn't infringe on copyright because there were no such laws in this world. Perhaps it could even earn her some extra income. She laughed when she saw the Icha books and bought them despite the vendor's disapproving glances. Hikari knew it was adult content, but in her previous life as Elena, she had internet access, so it was nothing new to her. She even thought that Icha was quite mild compared to what she knew from her past, even though she had never practiced it. The idea of writing such content also crossed her mind. In this conservative society, she could become a new sensation for the audience. Jiraiya-sensei, watch out, she thought with a playful grin. With a cheerful smile and 4 books for her collection, she left the bookstore, whistling with excitement. She had the idea of asking Yamada-san about publishing books. But her attention was drawn to a commotion. It seemed to be coming in her direction, and when she turned her head, she only saw a little yellow spot that pushed her, causing her to fall on her backside. She managed to hold onto the books against her chest to prevent any damage. On the ground, she turned her annoyed face toward the person who had pushed her, only to have her eyes widen upon seeing a child who had also fallen from the impact. He was small, almost similar to what her niece had been in her previous life, so she estimated he was around 10 years old. His blonde hair was already a familiar indicator, and his large blue eyes and rosy cheeks indicated that he had collided with the protagonist of this world. Well, to be precise, he had collided with her. 3 men who were following the child didn't seem friendly, making her tense up on the ground. One of them grabbed Naruto by the neck, and he complained, looking somewhat scared by the way the man seemed to despise him. She blinked in confusion when she saw the 3 men scolding him, shouting something about a prank at their shops and calling him a monster deserving punishment. Hikari's memories seemed confused. The story of Naruto primarily began when the boy was a Genin, so while he was despised by the village, there weren't such direct attacks like what she was witnessing now. There were only people talking and avoiding him. But when one of the men slapped the boy, something inside her ignited before she could stop it. She was torn. Hikari realized she was torn between her body and her mind. Hikari's body seemed to enjoy what was happening. Some part of her body seemed to remember that this child was responsible for October 10th and the death of her family. After several weeks of vivid memories in this body, she saw how the previous Hikari had hated that child like the rest of the village, despising him and speaking ill of the boy, the cause of her loneliness and her tearful nights over her deceased family. A part of her was happy to see the brat, the host of the 9-tailed fox, suffering. But her mind was against these emotions. Regardless of what he had done, seeing someone harm a child had always seemed despicable to her in her past life. Children, like adults, were generally unable to defend themselves, and when someone hurt them, it brought out the worst in her. She hated injustice. She had never liked others taking advantage of the weak. She always got into trouble for standing up for others. Seeing how they were treating a child, regardless of who he was, made her see red. She ignored her body because her mind had always been stronger. The books fell to the ground without her caring as she got up and gave a stern look to the man who had slapped the child. There was a collective gasp around her as he fell to the side. At the same time, she stood in front of Naruto, hands on her hips, with a stern expression. In her previous life, her mother was always a strict, serious, and loving woman who taught her to stand up for herself when necessary. On the other hand, her father was the more peaceful and calm part of the relationship. Even though many people think she takes after her father, with his naturally kind demeanor, she knows she resembles her mother much more. She's an introverted person, like her mother, rather than extroverted like her father. Additionally, she has her mother's intimidating gaze that scares anyone. The other 2 men seem surprised by her outburst, but she remains upset when she sees them. "What are you doing to this child?" she asks with a dark tone, ignoring the murmurs beginning to rise around her. The child continues to look at her from the ground, with disbelieving eyes and a red cheek, which fuels her anger even more than the memories of her past. While she appreciates the previous Hikari for having some knowledge in her mind and knowing the language of this world, she abruptly stops herself. She doesn't want to know more about this body and her past life, especially if it involves someone who condoned violence towards a child. The man on the ground gets up, looking at her with annoyance. "Listen, young lady, don't get involved in something that's none of your business. That monster deserves that and more," growls the man, making something inside her squirm with annoyance. The kick she delivers to his face is instinctive and satisfying, with the sound and sensation of a broken nose as he goes flying. The other two men try to attack her, but luckily, they are civilians whom she can handle easily with the faint memories of both lives, sending them flying with dislocated shoulders, making them hit the ground in a grotesque manner. A man she hadn't seen before lunges at her from behind, causing her to fall to the ground with his weight on top of her. He seems to want to immobilize her, but she fights like a wild animal and uses her elbow to send him flying onto his back. Her hand reaches for the kunai in her pocket, and she holds it against the man on the ground, with her straddling his hips and the kunai at his throat. Pure instinct, she thinks, surprised by her own movements. The man looks up at her from the ground in disbelief, but she defiantly spits in his face before knocking him out with a punch. She stands on her feet, looking at the four men on the ground with varying degrees of incredulity. However, her deathly gaze keeps them from getting up. She walks calmly to the blonde child, who remains in his position, looking at her in amazement. When she kneels, somewhat breathless from the exertion, she notices that the child's cheek is still red. Her face darkens. Those jerks, she wants to turn and give them a few more kicks, but when she turns, ready to continue the fight, a ninja appears in front of her. Her eyes widen because he's not an Onbu. From his attire, she can tell with some fear that he's a member of the Konoha military police, an Uchiha. She tenses up a bit when he sees the unconscious men before giving her a stern look. She raises her chin, unrepentant about what she did. "Miss, I need you to come with me to the Konoha military police headquarters," the man says calmly, and she feels a vein throbbing on her forehead. Hikari wasn't good with authorities, not in this life and not in the previous one, which makes her furious. "Fine, but you should take these jerks too," she grumbles, pointing at the men, earning more murmurs from the villagers, to whom she shoots venomous glances. She doesn't care. They were attacking a child, and for some strange reason, no one stopped them, not even you. So, if you're going to arrest me for doing your stupid job, at least take those idiots with you. She mutters stubbornly, regardless of the consequences. The whispers grow louder, and the man in front of her seems visibly irritated. She crosses her arms, knowing that Aki and Ruri will probably be furious when they find out what happened. The man signals, and some men appear out of nowhere to take away the unconscious and injured men. With a raised eyebrow from the man, Hikari feels uncomfortable but walks over to collect her books. She takes the opportunity to walk next to Naruto, who is still on the ground, struggling to believe what just happened. The police officer seems exasperated with her, and she mutters under her breath before approaching the child. She's not good with kids, having only been a good role model for her nieces and nephews in her past life, but she wants to make sure of something as she crouches down to the child's level. "Are you okay?" she quickly asks, studying his cheek intently. The child appears to be in a kind of daze but eventually nods, looking somewhat distracted, which makes her sigh. She gives him a faint smile, making the child appear a bit more incredulous. "I'm glad to hear that. Be careful on your way back home," she tells him before getting to her feet and following the police officer. The murmurs follow her all the way, but she ignores them. Fugaku Uchiha clearly hates her, Hikari thinks with boredom as she's escorted from a rather poor cell to the interrogation room, as if she's done something wrong. Even after recounting her story multiple times, saying that she was only helping a child, those stupid Uchiha members have been looking at her with suspicion, which makes her want to punch the bars when she's locked up in the cell again. They've read her medical history and whispered that her lack of memory might have made her act that way. But she angrily told them that she remembered who Naruto Uzumaki was, the Jinchuriki, and that made her a target again. So much for being a ghostly citizen no one notices. But that made her furious. Would they really treat a child like this? In the middle of the cell, she briefly thought of other children in history who not only suffered from bullying, but the Jinchuriki had harsh lives. It's not like she could do anything. While she could handle civilians with relative ease, fighting a ninja meant the end of the line. Her neck would be snapped before the week was over with how foolish she had been, but she had no regrets. Everyone deserves a glimpse of kindness in their life, and Naruto deserved much more for all he's been through. In the end, she watched as Fugaku arrived at the cell to unlock it and let her go. As soon as she stepped out, Ruri's arms enveloped her in a hug. The leader of the Uchiha clan gave her a look, almost challenging her to say something, but she just glared back, realizing that it was better to remain silent. Both of them sat down on a bench in silence, with Ruri asking her what had happened, but she didn't know what to say. "Otosan," someone called, causing her to look up. Even without his mask or Onbu attire, she could easily recognize Itachi Uchiha by his prominent eye bags for a young child. Her heart twisted seeing that he might be around 13 or 14 years old. He was just a kid who was part of the Onbu. He gave her a look that clearly recognized her, but amidst everything, he seemed confused to see her there. She looked away, feeling somewhat embarrassed. Itachi, Fugaku grumbled, apparently with annoyance. She wants to kick him for being a jerk to his eldest son, but she's already in enough trouble, so she just crosses her arms in annoyance, ignoring that Aki and Ruri will probably be furious when they find out what happened. The boy diplomatically says, "Okasan is waiting for you for dinner. She sent me because she was worried something might be happening." He appears somewhat detached from his father and continues to give him side eye. She looks at Fugaku, who seems irritated, and her temper boils. She wants to get up and give him a piece of her mind, but Ruri's hands hold her in her seat, causing her strained smile to tense. She's not a ninja, and they'd probably throw her back into the cell. However, she does want to leap at the man and break his face. Itachi raises an eyebrow in her direction before appearing to seriously contemplate something. He eventually sighs and leaves peacefully. A few minutes later, they exit the building, and she realizes it's nighttime. She has spent several hours in that place, and she's in a foul mood. Aki is waiting outside, running to her side, looking concerned. However, she ignores them and continues on her way with the books in her bag. While the idea of fighting villains in the Naruto story had appealed to her, she had also hated the childhood of its characters. It's such an empty world that treats its children poorly. She has the urge to kick something. When they arrive at the apartment, she collapses onto the sofa, feeling exhausted. She needs a long shower or 10 hours of sleep, either one. But when she sees Ruri and Aki staring at her, she knows she has to give several explanations before she can do anything, even with the hunger she feels right now. She quickly explains the situation, unable to stop herself from insulting and cursing the guys who beat the child. She doesn't care if she goes to jail. The next time she sees them, she plans to kick their butts again. But instead of supporting her, she watches as both Ruri and Aki exchange worried glances. "Well, that child. He's responsible for the October 10th incident," Ruri mutters nervously, looking away. This makes Hikari stop staring at the ceiling, feeling a bit more calculating as she looks at her friend. Ruri doesn't want to meet her gaze, and Aki doesn't have a better expression. His furrowed brow doesn't sit right with her. So, that's how it's going to be. She quickly takes her bag of books, removes 2 of them, and tosses them rudely at Aki, who barely manages to catch them. One of them hits his forehead, which she doesn't regret at all. These are the books she had bought for them, a cookbook for Ruri and an adventure book for Aki. She doesn't want those books. "Take these gifts that were meant for you. I don't plan on staying a minute longer with people who harm children, especially someone who claims to be a teacher. I'm embarrassed by the kind of example you'll set for those children," she growls at Ruri, who seems to shrink under her cold tone, with tears in her eyes. Aki looks incredulous, but her glare stops him. "Go to hell," she grumbles at Aki, who freezes in place, before grabbing her other 3 books and storming out of the apartment in anger. She doesn't want anything that Ruri has given her. She thinks as she begins to walk angrily through the cold village streets. They're not her friends, they were the friends of the person before she took control. Even though her chest burns with how she treated them, she clenches her arms with strength and starts to walk in annoyance. They're 2 people she barely remembers, and she's not attached to them. She's just advancing her idea of living on her own. This village is messed up, she thinks angrily. Everything is messed up. She stops in the middle of an empty street, looking at the sky. This night will be lonelier than the previous ones, she accepts, before starting to look for shelter for the night. She's alone in this world again, so she'd better adapt quickly. But she doesn't intend to follow other people's rules. No, Elena Callan, now known as Takatori Hikari, doesn't plan to be swayed by the twisted games of others. She's going to make her own life her way, whether anyone likes it or not.